Welcome to Global Perspectives. What are the keys to doing business in China? Negotiation is certainly one of them. For insights, we turn to Tim Cullen, Director of the Oxford Program on Negotiation at Oxford University.
Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to the show, Tim.
It's very good to be back, John. Good to see you.
Why don't we step back a little bit before we talk about China and talk about the art of negotiation? To many people, this means something very, very specific, and it typically is all about winning and achieving your maximum position and all of that. But help us with some of these misconceptions.
Well, I think that a negotiation where both sides end up being satisfied at the end of it is the desirable outcome you want to have. But many people make lots of mistakes in negotiations, and one of them is they don't put themselves sufficiently in the shoes of the other people. You really have to try to understand where the other person's coming from, all the pressures they may have on them, and so on. And if you do that, that's a very good starting point, and then you can determine items that are of high value to one side and low cost to the other on the same item, so then you're able to do trades. Negotiation is very much about reciprocity. You give me something, I get something in return, and when those things are of differing values in the mind of each side, then you make deals.
A lot of times people go into negotiations with a list of objectives. Each side surely has one. And some think that it's a good idea to start with one, address one, resolve it, and then move on to item two. Is that the best way to negotiate, or should we keep things sort of packaged or clustered?
Well, I think keeping things in play is very, very important. And so if you've got a long list of things you want to negotiate, first of all, you need to determine what are things you really need and what are things that would be nice to have, so that when it comes to push comes to shove, you maybe know you're going to have to give some things away. But you're absolutely right. The more things you can have on the table, the more things you can negotiate, the more opportunities you have to trade. And that's going to work best if, instead of just working straight down a list, say you've got 20 items to negotiate, you work straight down a list, negotiate each one individually. By the time you get to 16 or 17, you don't have the opportunity to package things and make trades. So keep things in play, keep them on the table, find out what both sides want. Once you've got an idea about this, then you can piece things together based on their relative values and make package deals.
How important is it to understand where the other side is coming from? As you know, I have a long background in the news business, and oftentimes you'll talk to the various parties in an issue of conflict or something, and they seem to be discussing different realities. And in the negotiating room, something similar happens.
Well, I think the concept of putting yourselves in the other side's shoes is very significant. That you need to understand if there are other people away from the table other than whoever you're negotiating with, who is perhaps influencing that person. Are you dealing with a real decision maker, or is this person going to have to keep referring to other people? And so I encourage negotiators to actually draw maps where they actually show the person or people they're negotiating across the table with, and then have lines coming out from there with little circles with all the influences that may come into play there. And if you've got all those things in mind, and you understand in a way psychologically where the person is coming from on the other side. So information gathering before the start of a negotiation is absolutely key. A lot of people want to rush straight into it without having found out enough in advance. So really find out as much as you can and really understand where the other side is coming from.
How important is it to understand that you may see the exact same issue or item in one way and the other party sees it in a different way? I mean, this cup of water, for example, I may see it as something essential because it helps my throat, but somebody else may see it as an appropriate courtesy to have a cup of water available.
Yeah, I mean, a very good example is some years ago, I was approached by the government of Bermuda that was interested in having a negotiation program. And we talked about how much it would cost to bring a team of people from the University of Oxford over to Bermuda. I liked the idea because we had very bad weather in England at the time, and the idea of going to Bermuda sounded nice. One of the things I said to the cabinet secretary there is, look, why don't you, when you're planning a trip to Britain, see if you can do it at a time when we're running our program in Oxford. And then if you can, you're already in the UK, you pay for a hotel, I'll give you the program free of charge. That's a program that probably cost about $8,000, $9,000. And I said, I'll give it to you free of charge. Now, from my point of view, I was giving away nothing, because teaching 36 people or 37 people in the class doesn't make any difference. To him, he was getting, it was worth $8,000 or so because he was getting this free negotiation. Plus, he was also determining whether this was a program that he'd like to bring to his country. It's a classic example of where no cost to me and very high value to him. And this is where you're looking for these, from each side's perspective, the same item has very, very differing values.
What I like about the approach you have to negotiation is that you really do seem to have a social conscience in addition to trying to achieve the goals of the discussion. And it seems that in this case that you just mentioned, you're thinking about the lives and livelihoods of the people being affected.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've found over the months that we've been discussing the UK's departure from the European Union, it's troubled me that the rhetoric on both sides has often in the past been quite hostile and quite unpleasant and so on. And I think that's a big mistake. And I think it's also, you see it happening within both sides. So very often in negotiation, you need to negotiate with your own people first before you go into the main negotiations. The other side would be doing the same. And you need to make sure you've got a unity of purpose on your side and on the other side. But then you need to be able to sit down with people and have constructive discussions. And many trade, I sometimes teach people at the World Trade Organization to negotiate. And I've talked to trade negotiators a lot. And they say, actually, we may be doing very tough things during the negotiations, but we go out and have a drink afterwards, and we remain friends, and we see them 6 months later on another negotiation and so on. And I think people need to think of the long term like that. They need to think of the fact that they may negotiate with the same people again and so on. So the idea of hostility, the idea of an opponent, is I like to refer to a counterpart. I don't refer to people we're negotiating with as opponents. They're counterparts. They're people with whom you want to reach a mutually agreeable agreement.
What happens if your negotiating partner, your counterpart, does get angry? And I've seen this happen any number of times, to the point where some people literally knocked their chairs down as they were jumping up to walk off in a huff. And other times I've seen people leave a negotiation but with a smile, and eventually they come back.
Yeah, I mean, if you do walk out of a negotiation, you're probably damaging yourself more than the other side, and you may well come back. I think that one of the other things that is problematic is that some people, to reinforce a point, will make a threat and say, if you don't do this by 5 o'clock tonight, we're going home, or something. And again, they make themselves hostage to fortune, because often making these threats, if you're not really willing to follow through on them, they're meaningless and you lose credibility. So I think the whole atmospherics of how you're relating to other people is very, very important, even aside from the actual issues you're negotiating.
Well, let's continue on then with China. What was your very first personal experience in China?
Well, it's hard to say when the very first experience was. A very, very long time ago, I remember buying a camera in Hong Kong and ending up rather dissatisfied. I didn't feel that I had got the best deal I could have done and so on. And these people selling cameras in Hong Kong are very, very skillful. So I suppose I had a somewhat jaundiced view of negotiating in China, but that's changed very much. And a lot of Westerners are taken aback by some of the things they experience in Chinese negotiations, and I think you can learn how to relate well to the Chinese. And I find Chinese people very, very good people to negotiate. I like negotiating with Chinese people.
What are some of the misconceptions that we have about negotiating in China?
I think one of the things is that the Chinese, given their position in the world of a very, very fast growing economic power, and when the Chinese people are investing a lot in Europe and elsewhere around the world, and I think some people have a fear that the Chinese are sort of wanting to take over and so on. And so there's this fear that the Chinese are going to be very hard bargainers and so on. And I mean, there's some truth in that. The Chinese do want to get a very good deal. They're very persistent. They're in it for the long term. They will be very patient and sort of keep negotiating for what they want. And I think that scares people a little bit. There's the other thing that you don't really know where you stand with the Chinese. And the Chinese have something like 6 ways of saying yes. Only one of them actually really means we got a deal. but others mean, yes, I hear what you say, or it's the equivalent of so, uh-huh, and so on. There are all these different ways of saying yes in Chinese. And so people say, oh, I don't know where I stand. But I think you start to understand these things, and particularly if you do what I always say to all negotiators, put yourself in the other side's shoes. Try to understand where they're coming from and what's of interest. And I find the Chinese are actually very fair people to deal with, and my experience is they stick to their word, and they it's part of the sort of Confucian ethic of the idea of harmony. But I think people also misunderstand to some extent the influences on the Chinese side. So there's a sort of sense that it's all traditional Chinese values. Whereas actually the Chinese have been influenced by other people as well. So they're influenced by Confucius, they observe Taoism and all of these sort of things going back centuries, many centuries. But they're also influenced by Adam Smith, probably influenced by Henry Ford with assembly lines. They look at what Warren Buffett does. They're influenced by Karl Marx. So there's a lot more recent stuff that influences the Chinese. And I think some people, again, get too carried away by the very, very long distance or way back in history influences. So I think that it's worth taking the trouble to understand something about Chinese history and why the Chinese do behave the way they are.
Is it your sense that the average Chinese person that you would have a discussion with, maybe even a negotiation, does relatively more research, relatively more prep than is the case here? Because whenever I go into a routine conversation with Chinese professionals, they seem to be very well versed in most of what I'm going to present. And if it's a negotiation, even more well versed.
I think they're very thorough, and I think it is a fault laid at the feet of many Westerners that they go in and want to do things quickly, just get on with it. And they don't do, I mean, in any culture, you do a lot of information gathering, find out as much as you can. One thing that sometimes frustrates people when they go to China, suppose they go to Beijing, and they're going to be negotiating with people, for the first couple of days, they're taken to the Great Wall, they're taken to the Forbidden City, they're taken to the Summer Palace, they're taken to quite a lot of restaurants. Sometimes they're drinking things that are sort of very, very strong tasting, and they're really not very comfortable drinking, but it would be offensive not to drink the things. And then they, when they've been eating duck's tongues several times and little eels that seem a bit unusual, and they think, when are we going to get on with the negotiation? But the Chinese are very smart. They're finding out a lot during that process. It's conversational, it's friendly, it's harmonious and so on, but they're noting down everything, they're paying attention. Plus, everybody should do a lot of homework before a negotiation anyway. Aside from the actual, what you find out when you're physically with people, but in advance you need to do a lot of advance work. And I find the Chinese are good at that, yes.
You mentioned having an idea about long-term, taking the long-term view on negotiations and planning and so forth. How important is that for negotiators from American companies to understand? Because you said that they tend to want to arrange something, conclude something quickly, and I've heard complaints from some organizations that say to me, we've been talking about this issue now for 5 or 6 years. When is this going to end? And they seem very frustrated, but it's a very large, important project, and so they feel invested in it and continue the conversation.
One very important thing you need to do is to make sure you have an intermediary you can trust, a Chinese intermediary who knows you very well, understands the other side. And through that individual, you can then, there's a big thing they have in China called guangxi. Guangxi is it's trust and relationships and so on. And a lot of negotiating with the Chinese is about building relationships. You need to be patient, getting to know whoever you're dealing with, picking up on some personal things. I work with some wonderful people in China, and one day I got to know them a bit. And one day, my counterpart brought his daughter into the conference room, and she presented me with a stool which she had made with her sister. She was an 11-year-old girl, and it had Chinese characters all over it. It was a very nicely made little stool, and she gave it to me as a gift. And now, it probably wasn't the easiest thing to take back to Britain in my suitcase, but I did. and I put it in my granddaughter's room, and I took a photograph of it there, and then I sent it to them. And it's those sorts of little things that show that you care and so on, and are very, very important. And it's genuine too. I mean, the people I work well with in China, I have a very warm relationship with. But it takes time. You need to build up the trust. And next time I went to China, I was invited to go to this daughter's school and give a talk about youth in England and what teenagers in England find important and so on. And there were 200 students I spoke to, and it was a school where they focus on English. Those sorts of things, I don't look at it cynically as a way of getting good results. I simply find it's human nature to be friendly like that, and so that lays the groundwork for your relationships in China. They're very, very important. The Chinese also don't forget very easily. So we talk about reciprocity a lot in negotiation. You give me something, I give you something. They remember if you do something for them. They remember that for a long time. And people who don't repay good favors and so on find it more difficult to negotiate in China.
In negotiating with the Chinese, how do you determine if the discussion is genuine, if the negotiating partner is really working with you in an independent fashion versus this idea that many people have, which is a leftover from the Cold War, that everything is top down and the Chinese basically are told what to do, how to think, and so forth?
Well, I really certainly don't feel that. I find that the Chinese people I know and my Chinese friends and so on have the same aspirations as many people do. They want to have a good life. They want their children to have a good life. They broadly believe that the government encourages, for instance, or is used to encourage domestic savings, which help fuel the economy, and people are willing to forego immediate consumption in order to have their children have a better life. And so there's a sort of, I think there's a sort of trust and belief that the government's going to be supportive. It's a different system than we have in the United States or in Europe, and obviously there are some big differences there. But the ordinary people that I know, the educated people I know, seem to have many of the same aspirations as we do. That works very well. I find my Chinese friends are not a whole lot different than my Western friends. We talk about many of the same sorts of things. Nowadays with social media, there's a lot more, everybody knows a lot more about what's going on everywhere. So even though there are some constraints, actually everybody has a mobile phone. They have WeChat accounts, which are like WhatsApp. There's sort of things we send messages all the time. So there is a much greater openness. The other thing is the Chinese media is kind of interesting because there are controls on the media, but actually a lot of, unless it's international politics and international relations and things like that, actually one of the problems sometimes is that Chinese media are not observing enough discipline and so on, and when they're reporting accidents and things like that. And so, that in the West we wouldn't particularly like the level of reporting. So again, these are things that they're the same sort of things we grapple with. So I find there's more in common with Chinese people than there is. The concept that the average Chinese person is not feeling they can speak freely at all and so on, I just do not find to be true. I wonderful relationships with the Chinese people I know.
Well, let me ask you a related question. Let's say I'm the head of a U.S. company and I'm really interested in the Chinese market, but I don't have anyone in my circle who speaks the language, who knows the culture, who knows the history, and I don't really have contacts here that might help me with those details. And at the same time, I see ads for a lot of individuals and organizations in China that are willing to act as intermediaries.
Yes.
Do I trust them, or do I automatically assume that they will probably not represent my interests as effectively as possible?
It's a very, very difficult question, and I mean, it's caveat emptor. You need to be very, very careful who you take on to help you, and you need to do a lot of research and find out. I mean, in addition to what I do at Oxford, I have an advisory business, and we work with people getting into China. And I mean, I'm phenomenally well served by one of my colleagues, the director of my company, who's Chinese. She's now a Swedish citizen, but she gives me very good advice all the time. I don't go to China without her. And after we've been in a meeting, she'll say, Tim, that face, you should not show that face in the meeting. I could tell that you are unhappy with what he said, but you should not show that face. So I'm getting on-the-spot advice as I go along. And so I think that for people that are entering the Chinese market completely fresh, you need to look around, find people who will work with you, work as intermediaries, and look at a lot of people before you decide, and make sure the chemistry is really, really good. Test it out when it doesn't matter that much. And once you've got, so in my particular case, I'm immensely fortunate because you have this one person who's a key director of my company who just keeps me straight in China. Make sure that when I'm in the UK, I'm getting advice from her. No, don't ask them the question that way, ask them the question that way. I mean, you need that sort of advice, and it's something we give this advice to other people as well, but within my company I find that really makes a big difference.
I'm curious, do you now find yourself checking and testing your facial expressions?
Well, I do a little bit. I mean, I am much more conscious now of, I would otherwise just not worry too much about if I showed a bit of, somebody says something and a human reaction is to say, oh God, that, like that. But I've just got to exercise self-discipline. And sometimes people find this frustrating about the Chinese too, that they always seem to be smiling, and they may actually be really saying, no, I'm not remotely interested, but they say it with a smile and so on, and people sometimes misunderstand the signals. And I think having Chinese people with you, I mean, ideally you need a combination when you're dealing with the Chinese side of Westerners who are very experienced in China, know a lot about China, and Chinese people who know the West very well, so that your Chinese counterparts can be reading the other side very well and so on. Your Chinese colleagues rather can be reading the other side very well and feeding that back and so on. So it is complicated, it is different, culturally a lot different, but the more you understand the culture and the history, and I find myself sometimes saying things just in passing, not drawing attention to them, but I will actually make a reference to a metaphor that Deng Xiaoping used. And they know that I've done my homework, and I'm not making a big thing about it, I'm just mentioning it in passing, a way of expressing something, and they like that. It shows that I've taken the trouble to be interested in their country.
We're about to run out of time, but quick question. After you've concluded a negotiation in China or someplace else and you've got a basic agreement, is there still an opportunity to negotiate something else, or should you just be happy with that? Or should you think about maybe improving what you've just negotiated?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One is make sure the agreement that you sign is the same one you've reached at the table. It's very important. Often it's not. But the second thing is that I think modern negotiation thinkers quite often do say, right, it's all over, we've got the deal, we've initialed it, can we now relax, sit back, what we've got remains whatever happens, but now can we let our defenses down a little bit, talk things through a little bit, anything that either of us can give which would make it better for both of us. And certainly it's worth trying to do that in any negotiation.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tim Cullen. And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.